Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another episode of Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank Zaberick, and in that great words of that great game show host, Steve Harvey, we got another good one for you folks. And today, I was, I'm still licking my wounds over the what they call the red tidal wave, the red tidal wave that really never got off the kilter last year. At least I think the Republicans probably should have taken both the House and the Senate. And so anyway, and then there was situations in New Hampshire where all the incumbents that were running for like a state level or federal level offices all got reelected. So maybe we can talk a little bit about those elections, along with what's wrong with the Republican Party, and maybe, if you talk about it's January already, January 2023, and the presidential race will come up next year. Well, next November 2024. So now, hopefully, if we talk like a year and a half ahead of time, hopefully some things will change in the New Hampshire legislature if they catch wind of this show, maybe, of things changing. Because if you wait till next year, October, November, saying, we didn't see this coming, how did this happen? So hopefully, anywho, my guess is no stranger to New Hampshire politics. Her name is Karen Testerman. Karen, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Frank. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, no problem. So what do you have any thoughts or feelings of the red wave that never took place last November?
Well, I think it was some of the propaganda that was going on in the media about where it was, and the media does various things. I mean, they have polls that they conduct, and in the polls, if you really look at them, because these are all very short, usually 5-question polls, you'll find that they're really trying to find out if maybe they can't drop a little hint to you that this might be coming up down the road, like who might be running for president. Would you consider somebody running for president who's currently in office in New Hampshire? You'll get those 5-minute polls, and then they blast it all over that 70% of the public does such and such, right? But if you really went to polls, which I tend not to pay a lot of attention to anymore, but if you went to something like the polling company that was run for years, they do a series of questions, and it's a good long survey that goes through. It is one that checks here. You made this statement here, and then they'll ask a question over here that has a reflection back to the original question. And by the end of it, they can analyze whether or not you were actually, what direction you were really going with your support. And so we have to be careful about what weight we give to the polls. And I think that the red wave was really one of those things that the propaganda media wanted you to have and be focused on. Meanwhile, other things were going on that maybe they didn't want us to look at. So I think the red wave was something that was building up hope, and so in building up hope for one side over the other causes the other side to maybe work a little harder, and maybe the promoted side to be more relaxed in what they're doing and not work as hard because they're taking something for granted. So.
And when we talked a little bit about this, I think I get this down. I'll just digress a little bit here. That there seems to be an old cliche after the 2020 presidential election, and now this midterm last November, that Republicans are excellent campaigners, but Democrats are excellent at elections. They're geniuses at elections.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about something like early ballots, early voting, early ballots, or ballot harvesting, That's something I know nothing or little to nothing about. Does that go on a lot, like in New Hampshire, ballot harvesting and early voting?
Well, it's not supposed to be, but so my analysis of what goes on in New Hampshire and the way to fix New Hampshire's elections so that the election person actually feels confident that their vote means something and that it's being counted is that we have to go back to what the Constitution says. And so one of the things I can remember early on when I first encountered this same-day registration business that goes on in New Hampshire, the Secretary of State, I asked the Secretary of State if there was not a way that we could sequester those votes until we verified that these people were actually living in the place that they said they were and were entitled to, met the qualifications to be a real elector, right? And he said, well, according to the Constitution, it says that those votes must be counted on the day that the election occurs. And he's right. It's in Part 2, Article 32. It says that those votes are supposed to be counted. Now, that law or that constitutional provision has not changed since it was adopted, except to add that maybe you had a little bit longer to get the results to the Secretary of State's office. But that still remains there. Okay, if we're going to follow the Constitution there, we need to follow the Constitution when it comes to who can be the elector, right? And it says very clearly that the people who can vote in the state of New Hampshire are the inhabitants. Now, what's an inhabitant? Somebody who's 18 years of age and who legally resides here in the state on a permanent basis. It's not that they just have a residence here, because you can have a residence in Florida and a residence in California and a residence in New Hampshire, but where are you legally residing, right? And where is it you call your home, your domicile, right? So if we really went to that, and then we looked at how do you get an absentee ballot? In 1941, 1942, the legislature passed an amendment that said that if you wanted to get an absentee ballot, because of our military who were out of country or out of the state, they weren't located in their homes locale, their domicile, that they could get a ballot. And they expanded it if you were medically incapable of getting to the polls. But otherwise, we went to the polls on the day of election and we cast our ballot. Now, in this last election, I know there were several people I know who actually got ballots in the mail or who got registrations in the mail, which is not the way we do things in New Hampshire in the first place. But that's just one segment. But the other part of it is that if we were to follow the Constitution and when it was written, that's how it's going to be interpreted. There were no electronics in the 1700s. So why do we have voting machines? Those are totally unconstitutional. If you want to have the voting machines be a part of the solution or of the process, then you have to go through the proper process to amend the Constitution to allow them. And we haven't done that. When you want to expand because of the Cooties bill, the qualifications of getting an absentee ballot, you need to go through the proper process to amend the Constitution of the state of New Hampshire. But the problem is we have a lot of legislators as well as the man on the street who don't know their Constitution, so they don't know what they're fighting for.
I hear you. Now, when you say visitors like from other states who may be voting twice,
yeah,
I then automatically think of Dartmouth College, the University of New Hampshire. Does St. Anselm's have a lot of out-of-state students? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and you have Plymouth State, you have Keene State. Any place where there's a college, you're going to have, there are people who come into the state who are from out of state who want to take advantage of what we have. And so they have to, in order to qualify for in-state tuition, they have to file a very stringent application that says, where do your parents live, and are you independently living from your parents? If you're independently living from your parents and you reside here in the state of New Hampshire, then you qualify. But if your parents live someplace else and they're paying your bills, or you're getting your scholarship from another state, and you decide you're going to pull a ballot in New Hampshire, you just violated that contract and you should lose all of it.
So there must be some computer system or something. Like, let's say Dartmouth has excuse me, has a kid that lives in New York City. Him and his parents reside in New York City. Couldn't they check on computers to see if that kid is registered in New York City?
Well, there should be some way, but you have to have an administration in the state who's willing to do that research, or who will find the funds to do that research, and they don't necessarily. It's very interesting to me that a lady who was had moved to here from Colorado just recently had put in to the mail system, right, her change of address. She got an immediate response from the town in which she lived that we have notification that you have left the community here, that you no longer live here, and so we're going to remove you from the voter rolls. Immediately when they got it. But that is a process that is set up in the state of Colorado. In the state of New Hampshire, we only purge our lists every 10 years. So you can have somebody who's on the list and a student, for example, who registered to vote and they graduated, they left the state, went back home or wherever, and their name is still there. It's still on the election rolls, and somebody else can come in and know that that's what happened and pick up their ballot and say that that's who they are. The other thing is with our same-day registrations, if you don't have your voter, if you don't have your picture ID, you can go over to the table over here and sign an affidavit that says that you left your ID someplace else and you need to but you still want to vote. You fill out the paperwork, you swear that this is all honest, and they are supposed to take your picture. But if you want to claim a religious exemption, you don't have to have your picture taken. So now you can fraudulently vote, right? And I don't know what religion that applies to, but as an elected official, I can't ask you. So you get by for free. And you can, because of the same-day voter registration in this state, you could go to a polling place in Nashua, say Ward 1. You can go over to Ward 4 and do exactly the same process, and there's nobody that's checking up on you.
Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. But the Speaker of the House a few years ago, when there were 6,000 same-day registrations, actually asked how many of those within a year had applied for the New Hampshire driver's license. 1,000. Now, in that particular election, there were three federal elections that lost their positions, and they lost them by under 5,000 votes. So you see the corruption that's available.
Also, I just thought of something too. I know way back, well, when I was in the Air Force, there was an Air Force base, Pease Air Force Base outside of Portsmouth, but I think they closed that down. Was there also a naval base? I don't know if that's still operating.
Pease is an active duty base, but it is a reserve base. And so you still have military reservists serving over there. But there is the Portsmouth shipyards that is still and Navy still operates over there. So you
Okay,
still,
so there's other transit people that maybe live.
but the military, usually what you do, unless you have established a residence here, right?
All right.
Like you bought a house off base and you're living in it. But military usually has a home of record somewhere. When my husband was in the military, our home of record was California. And so when we voted, we wrote to California, got an absentee ballot, and sent them in. Part of the problem with that is that there is a transition period for the mail to get from one place to the next. And so sometimes your ballot didn't get there in time on the return, so you didn't get to have it counted. There's some discrepancy, and in some cases, different locales will decide they're not going to count those absentee ballots unless there's enough numbers difference that it might make a difference. And that's wrong too. Every vote that is cast should be counted.
Okay.
So, but
So, we're talking about like the red wave, the red tidal wave that never really happened. One state stood head and antlers above the other 49, and that would be Florida. What is Florida doing in their elections that New Hampshire and the other states aren't?
I don't know. I don't know a lot about what Florida's doing. I only really am attuned into what's going on in the state of New Hampshire. And I know that if we don't go back to our Constitution and insist that our Constitution be enforced, and that any of the laws, the residency laws, the voting laws for students, the same-day registration, these things have to be corrected or nullified, actually, because they are unconstitutional. If we're going to be operating under this document that our founders gave to us, then we need to operate under it, and we need to call into account those people who are doing the job. So the Secretary of State, primary responsibility of the Secretary of State, other than keeping records on businesses and so forth like that, the primary responsibility of the Secretary of State is to run honest, fair elections for our state. And New Hampshire is different from every other state in the Union. We are a unique body here. And I think we're a crown jewel. Number one, we don't pay our legislators exorbitant amounts of money, so you don't. The only thing that they can really play with is power, because they get $100 a year. Everybody else in every other state gets thousands of dollars for their elected representatives.
Like in Massachusetts.
Well, yeah, and there is a bill in front of the House now that would amend the Constitution to allow for an increase in the pay of the legislators. The thing is that because we don't pay our legislators a whole lot, and because we have 400, we are the most well-represented people in the country. Every other community in Massachusetts, for example, their state representative has thousands of people that they're responsible for. In New Hampshire, it's 3,500. Your constituency, you can actually talk to those people throughout your elected term of 2 years, right? So we need to really hone in and appreciate the system that we have here in this state, and
Amen.
and really work hard to make sure that it is operating the way we think it should be, the way our founders set it up. And there's elements of our government that we don't know about on the average person because we haven't gotten into our history in the way we should. And we don't examine our founding documents and how important they really, really are. And in fact, one of the discoveries I've made over the last 2 years is that there was a 12th Amendment and a 13th Amendment that was part of the original 10. And the 12th Amendment, actually, there was some student who found it and set it up and actually got it ratified. So it's now part of, I think it's, can't remember which amendment it is. It's in the 20s, but that is now part of the national amendments. But the 13th Amendment said that if you were a person of nobility or had a title from another country, that you could not assume the position of President of the United States. And it's interesting because where is that 13th Amendment? We found it. It's in the archives of New Hampshire. So we have, we need to go back and in some cases really look at our history and understand our history because it's rich.
Do you have any thoughts or feelings on what President Biden said recently? I guess when he ran against Trump in 2020, I guess he had his problems in Iowa and New Hampshire. But then when he went to South Carolina, that's where he really took off. They love Joe Biden in South Carolina.
They do.
So therefore, I guess he's pushing to change the election to have South Carolina as the first primary and back up both Iowa and
the Democrats party is trying to do that. But it's really interesting because there is a law in the state of New Hampshire that was passed several years ago that says that any primary and any other place in the country must fall 1 week after New Hampshire's. So the Secretary of State has the permission because he or she sets the date of the election. And if South Carolina moves it to February 1st, New Hampshire's Secretary of State must move 7 days prior the New Hampshire primary.
Also, it has nothing to do with
the parties, no.
President Biden's wishes.
No, or anybody else's wishes. It's already in the state, in the state laws in the state of New Hampshire, in our revised standard, what is it, annotated. It already is there that our elections, our primary, will always be first in the nation. So I think it's hilarious in some respects because this whole thing about first in the nation, and we've got to protect first in the nation. First in the nation is already protected. We just need to say, hey, go ahead and move your primary whenever you want to. We'll still be moving ours a week ahead of yours, even if it runs into the year prior.
And Iowa's not really an election, that's a caucus?
It's a caucus, so it's not a primary. So Iowa has been the first test in the nation, right? And New Hampshire's always been the first in the nation primary since they passed that particular RSA.
Okay, I'll take your word for it on that. Now, we'll maybe get back to the technical stuff a little bit later. The elections itself, well, right now the only candidate official is Donald Trump. Do you have any thoughts or feelings on Donald Trump's possible rebid?
Rebid? I couldn't tell you what's going to happen because until we get our election integrity solidified and the trust of the people back into the election process, I don't know that we're going to have an honest assessment. But I will say that he still continues when he has his rallies, and it's amazing how
it is.
I'm not sure why he's having the rallies, except that he is considering running. He continues to bring in thousands. When the cameras actually go out and pan, and I've had people send me their telephone. Right, telephones are the greatest promoter of
cell phones.
Cell phones and their videos, where they're there and they pan the crowds and they're massive. Even when he can shame the media into actually turning their cameras around to show it, they're massive crowds.
Amazing.
So it is amazing. So why would you not get, I mean, when Kennedy did his, I think it was Kennedy used to do his whistle stop tours on the trains and so
Him or
forth.
Truman.
Yeah, somebody did it.
Yeah.
And when they do those, you look out at the crowds, and that was what sort of a determining factor. How many people can you pull in on those little tours? How many of the average people come out because they're fascinated or interested in what you're offering?
Yeah, well, I think that was the whole thing behind the January 6th committee that Congress had. They just did that solely to mess up Donald Trump from ever getting elected again.
Well, that January 6th was actually the day that they were going to ratify the numbers that came in from all of the states and to say, certify the count, right? Now, in that, and this is very interesting because January 6th in 2023, the Supreme Court of the United States is going to conference to see if they're going to rule on a case that has been brought, or what do they call them? A pleading that's been brought in front of them. It's one of the Brunson brothers versus the representative from Utah, Adams, and the Biden, Harris, Pence, Pelosi, and 380 plus Congress people for a violation of their oath of office. Now, what are we talking about, right? So it turns out that there were 14 senators and 140 Congress people who actually said at that hearing on January 6, 2021, that they questioned, that they felt that there was enough evidence that was coming forth that there might have been some outside influences, be they within the country or from outside the country, from other countries, that would have influenced our election. And if that was so, shouldn't we do an investigation to see, take a break from this and do an investigation to see? Well, the rest of Congress and Pence actually moved forward and ignored that. Did they violate their oath of office by doing so? And did they put this country of America at risk for being infiltrated by another country who would influence our elections? And so this is called the Brunson brothers case against Congress. If that comes forward, and if the Supreme Court decides to rule on this, that's going to have a massive effect in the long run. Because if they do rule that they should have taken that 10-day break to sit there and investigate this, then, and we've shown already in some cases that there was some influence from China and other countries, did they put us at a national security risk by doing so, by being, possibly being overtaken by another country?
Not to mention this latest Twitter files, the scandal, where Elon Musk bought out Twitter, and he's revealing all these files.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of hanky-panky that went on. Yeah. Trump was right about election fraud.
Yeah.
So a lot of people might feel sorry for him, saying he rightfully should be the president right now.
Well, they may feel sorry for him, but the other thing that has happened because of it is that your people who would go to the polls normally to cast a vote, and because they trusted that their vote meant something, now think that their vote has been compromised and they don't. Why bother? So you've disenfranchised a whole lot of people from even going to the polls to vote. And that's wrong as well, because
that's true.
We the people are supposed to be able to tell our government what they are supposed to do. And right now, it seems that the government's telling us how we're supposed to serve them. We need to figure out how to get back to what our founders fought for.
Okay.
All those many
So
years ago.
hypothetically speaking, even though they're rumored to pull papers like in the next month or two, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, and former Vice President Mike Pence, do you have any thoughts or feelings on either one of those two gentlemen?
No, not really.
I don't think I'm going to have like a bumper sticker on my car in the New Hampshire primary.
Well,
I like all three. I love Pence, I love DeSantis, and I love Trump.
Well, it's interesting too, because don't forget, if you go back to the 2016 election, right? And we started getting, what was her name? Carly Fiorina jumped in. And then,
Okay,
and Pawlenty was in. And we had 17 candidates in a short period of a year that emerged, right? So we're 2 years out, and we're a little less than 2 years out now, and we're going to say we're going to be down to 3 candidates. That's not going to happen.
No.
I mean, if nobody else, what's his name that wears the boot on his head? He'll be a candidate here in New Hampshire, because in New Hampshire, it's great. You can put down $1,000, or you can bring in a number of signatures, and you can run for president. And what greater thing to tell your children, Frank, than I ran for president of the United States? It's a great legacy for your family.
Definitely, definitely. But I would say, well, if it's those three, like a year and a half from now, November of next year, like I said, I won't have a bumper sticker on my car. But if it's like Trump versus Liz Cheney, that's a no-brainer. I'm not even considering Liz Cheney. So it all depends who's the nominee. And it's way too early yet to speculate on that.
Exactly.
But, okay, now let's get back to the races here in New Hampshire. And I just looked at like some of these, particularly, I don't really know that much about District 1. Nashua's not in District 1. We're in Congressional District 2.
Right.
But that young lady, Caroline Levitt,
right,
she seemed to be a pretty sharp cookie for a 25-year-old.
She is very, very astute and quite the campaigner. She does a really, really good job. And she seems to have a real solid moral compass. So, she was a good candidate. In fact, we had good candidates all the way around.
I agree.
And unfortunately, there are some who would like to say that the reason that we lost was because we had poor candidates. No, we had good candidates. We, quite honestly, I'm not sure that the machines are honest. I'm not sure that there's not an algorithm or something that can go on. There have been people like Brenda Town and Marilyn Todd, and now I just met a young man yesterday, or a gentleman yesterday, he just moved into New Hampshire a little over a year ago, and he's going through the numbers in his community, in his county, and he's saying something is not adding up. The anomalies are too consistent that it's questionable. And of course, now the towns that he's looking at all have machines, but he wants to now look at some communities that didn't use the machines and see if the anomalies reproduce. Those are things that people in New Hampshire, are citizens of this state, will take it upon themselves, and they're not getting paid to do it. They're doing it on a volunteer basis because they love this state and they love their country, and they want to make sure that what we think is happening is actually happening.
But one obvious thing I got right off the bat, especially from the Kuster Bob Burns race for the District 2 and Don Bolduc versus Maggie Hassan.
Yeah.
Maggie Hassan and Ann Kuster have like $1 zillion in their campaign war chest.
Right.
And the two they were running against, I mean, they were spending money on bad-mouthing Bob Burns and Don Bolduc they want to eliminate Medicare and Social Security.
Yeah, somebody went out and spent a whole lot of signs to make sure that message was scattered everywhere. It wasn't just on social media. It wasn't just on the television or, mainstream media. They had signs everywhere, plastered everywhere on saying that about Don Bolduc. It was
so somehow, someway. I was going to ask you too. What do you think of replacing Ronna McDaniel, the chair of the Republican committee or whatever, with Harmeet Dillon? I don't know if you watch her on Fox News. She's a contributor on Fox News. Yeah. I think there has to be some distribution of the campaign funds. Like Don Bolduc was choked out by Mitch McConnell or whoever.
Yeah, well, there was a whole lot of money being spent by the Republicans against our own representatives, both in the primary and in the general. It was done by our governor, even got involved in the primary, which he should never have done, because, the whole idea is the message from the Republican Party, and I can only speak from there because that's where my experience is that the message is always, we have to elect the Republicans. We have to elect Republicans. And it's not about this one's more platform oriented versus this one who is not abiding by the platform 60% of the time or something along those lines. No, if you're going to say it has to be a Republican, then in the primaries, as an elected Republican leader, you should not be involved in picking and choosing. You should be keeping your mouth shut until afterwards and then supporting whoever the people decide should be the nominee.
That was one thing I really didn't like about Chris Sununu right off the bat. I mean, he in the congressional 2nd district race, he was back in the mayor of Keene
during the primary. During the primary,
yeah.
After the primary, once the people had decided who they wanted the nominee to be, definitely he should be up there saying something about it. But during the primary, he got involved in all of it. And it says very clearly in the state party bylaws that the elected members, or the elected leadership, the chairman, the vice chairman, the secretary, the assistant secretary, the treasurer, and the assistant treasurer, should remain neutral in all primaries, right? It also says that if you are, we have a state committee that is elected, and it also says that if you are someone from the Republican committee who backed another party when there was already a Republican nominee, then you can't serve on that committee either. I mean, so there's some very specific limitations that are there. And, but we know personally and so forth that our leadership did not do that they were involved during the primaries, which was a naughty no-no. But, we in New Hampshire now, the chairman and the vice chairman of the state party have let it be known that they're not running for another term. So we have elections coming up at the end of this month. And those elections will determine who's supposed to be in charge of the party. There are secondhand stories, I guess is what you want to say, that the governor, who was elected by the people, has told the party that he's the one that's in charge because he's the senior most elected person. That is sort of something that has been assumed a little bit just because giving them honor for who they are. But he was elected by the people, not by the state committee. So the state committee is the ones that really should be telling their chairman and their vice chairman and their elected officers, this is the direction we want us to go. And it's a little bit of that power struggle that's going on, and goes on, I think, even in the Democrat Party, and I'm sure it goes on in the Libertarian Party or the Constitution Party. There's always, it's human nature that we're going to have this power struggle going on. So that's a lot of it.
I mean, as far as like him endorsing Sununu endorsing George Hansel in the Republican primary against Bob Burns and the Chinese lady.
Oh, Lily Tang Williams.
Yes, her. And supposedly, did he have his hand in the Senate Republican primary with Chuck Morse?
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
I mean. I can understand if his blood brother or his dad want to run against Maggie Hassan. And, of course, nobody would blame him for endorsing his brother or dad.
In the general election, that would be expected. But, if you were really, truly principled, you would be saying it's up to the people. Yes, I support my brother. Yes, all of those things. Yeah. But I wouldn't be actively campaigning because of my elected position. You need to use some ethics in the whole thing, right? And there's a proper way to do it, and one that is just, I'm looking for power and I'm going to get the best I can get.
Yeah. And my assessment too, Bob Burns, Don Bolduc, even Caroline Leavitt, do you think they invoked Joe Biden enough in their respective campaigns? When they were invoking, even the debate moderators were talking about, did you believe that Donald Trump is the true president right now? That he got ripped off. And they never brought up things about Joe Biden's dementia or his cognitive decline problems or something like that.
But the whole thing is that why do we care about the personalities? What we really want to do is we want to solve the problems that are facing America.
Amen.
We want to have energy independence, for example. We want to have, we would like to have the homeless problem addressed. We want people to be able, we want our children to be able to read, write, and compute. We want our scores to be going up. The scores, when I think it was Jimmy Carter was in office, and that's when they established took the Department of Education out of Health, Education, and Welfare, right? And moved it into its own department all by itself, so that it could now encourage the students of the America to score higher on the STEM issues, on science, technology, and math. And what have we done? We've done nothing but plummet. The more money that we spend, the more bureaucracy there is, the further our scores go down. And our children can't read, write, and compute. They can't fill out a job application. They can't. There are some, yes, that make it through the system and score very highly. But the majority, if you look at across the country at where our scores are, they're abysmal. We're like 34th or 35th in the world. We're not up at the top 10% where we were. That was our goal at one time. So why aren't we addressing those instead of looking at whether
Donald Trump's is real president,
right? Or whether his hair is combed in the right way, or whether Joe Biden has an ear off? Or,
yeah.
Some of this stuff is just not worth my time.
I'm just saying that, Bob Burns, I mean, Ann Kuster was bringing up the fact that, that she heard somewhere that Donald Trump is coming to New Hampshire, just before the election. And, he never did. But there was a bigger story that Bob Burns kind of left on the table, so to speak, that if any candidate, like Senate candidate, that was having trouble, needed like support from Joe Biden, he'd fly down and campaign. But nobody wanted him to campaign because he's not that cognitive up there. And, why didn't Bob Burns, address that, Instead, Jill Biden, I think, made an appearance to Manchester before the election. But what she says or doesn't say is totally irrelevant as far as New Hampshire voters go.
Well, but
who cares what Jill Biden has to say?
I don't know. We bring in we're very spoiled in the state because we are first in the nation, because we are a retail politics state where you can come in and for a nominal amount of money, make a few connections here and there and determine whether or not your appeal is there. So we have people who come to the state of New Hampshire and think that maybe they'd like to run for president in the United States, and they go out and they fall flat. They've spent a little bit of money and they say, hey, it's not working, and they don't run, right? You have others who come here and they start to gain momentum and not like Trump. Trump came in and everybody was there, but there were other people who came in and they gradually gained momentum and eventually run for president. And quite honestly, they go through the Iowa caucus and they do the New Hampshire primary and they say, we're not catching fire enough to be able to continue to spend the money. So they're making the conscious decision that this is it, and they drop out. So that's the way it ought to be, but the focusing on what are the real issues and how can we address them also gets down to the fact, and this is something that sort of I think about a lot. When a candidate comes in and you're asking them to tell us who you are and what have you accomplished and what are you going to do for the country, I want to know what are your limitations in the office that you're seeking that you can actually do and accomplish. So as a congressman, you're going to be able to say, if I am able to sit on the House Armed Services Committee, for example, like Jean Shaheen does, I would be able to influence the legislation that comes in, and I would be keeping open the fact that New Hampshire has a Pease Air Force Base, and we have
the naval base.
Yeah, the Portsmouth Naval Ship Yard that we might be able to do something with, and I want to make sure that we keep them in the news, in the consideration, so that we don't close them because we lose our economy there, or some of the economy there. Why aren't we talking about those things? Why aren't we talking about the unspent nuclear fuel that's over at Seabrook? How can we be able to enable the people of the New Hampshire to be able to use that and remove maybe some of the restrictive legislation that is in existence? There are other things that we should be talking about rather than somebody's personality.
I hear you. One pundit I found kind of interesting that I don't know about anywhere else in the country, but I don't think it really pertains to New Hampshire, saying apparently, like independents especially, were very sympathetic to the whole subject of election deniers, following Trump when he's a quote-unquote election denier, and yet Hillary Clinton in 2016 wasn't too happy when she lost. That lady Stacey Abrams, well, she lost again this year, but she lost in 2018 too in Georgia.
Yeah.
And she never conceded the fact that she lost that.
Yeah.
Although officially the other guy got more votes, a Republican, so he was the thing.
He moves forward, right.
And then Al Gore in 2000 wasn't a happy camper. John Kerry in 2004 wasn't a happy camper. So you lose an election, you put a lot of heart and soul into it, you're going to get ticked off. And when
Well,
Trump gets ticked off, I mean, he gets ticked off. I
Yeah.
mean, more so than probably most people, but it's understandable.
well, and really, is that their total focus, or is that somebody else is trying to build it up
Exactly.
and make a big story out of it because it would draw readers, it would draw an audience. And so we have to be discerning in that manner and say, are we going to go down this path, or are we going to move on to something that has more substance that we can actually make a difference doing?
Another thing that the pundit brought up too, another thing they were saying that independents were sympathetic to the Roe v. Wade being defeated, being dissolved by the Supreme Court. Do you, a very personal question here, although I can say I don't know one lady in New Hampshire that's had an abortion. But then again, I hang around mostly church people, where I mostly socialize with my church, so.
Well, even in the churches, there are a number of people who have, and I have encountered them, and they are, once they realize what it was that they actually accomplished, because when you're going in and you're in a stressful situation, you don't always ask all the right questions. Once they realize what it was that had happened, they are very pro-life at this point. They are recognizing that life is precious. And you want to know why we have some of the problems we have right now as far as employment and filling those jobs out there. How help wanted signs do you see out there? And we're told it's all because of the benefits that the country gave to us during the cooties pandemic, right?
Yeah, COVID, yeah.
I'm sorry. But we want to know, we blame that particular situation. People are getting all of this money. Why should they go back to work? No, that's not all of the story. Part of the story is over the last 40 years, over 60 million lives have been destroyed that would be contributing to our existence, that would be workers, that would be, going to school and sort of things. You look at the decline in population around the country today, and it's alarming. And our reproduction rate, so that on average, every female in the country needs to produce 2.1 babies, I think it is, 2.2 babies. How you do a 0.2 baby, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But at any rate, on average, that needs to happen in order to replace society as it is today. And we've got a reproduction rate that's around 1.7, 0.8. It's under 2. So these are some of the reasons that all of those help wanted signs are out there. It's not all where they think. And we wanted to say that it was all about the Supreme Court making this decision. Well, the decision that they made was constitutional. It isn't up to the federal government to make that decision. It's up to the state.
And in New Hampshire,
people.
you can still, in New Hampshire, I could be wrong here, you can get up to 2 or 3 months pregnant to get an abortion.
Yeah,
something like that.
Up until 24 weeks.
Okay, I knew it was something like
which
that.
Which is really codifying Roe v. Wade in the state. So why would you even concentrate on that?
Yeah. Okay, we're making excellent time here, but I want to squeeze in one more question I have. I think we're going to debate on this, though. Your favorite congressman, the Congressman-elect George Santos of Long Island, New York, the compulsive liar. Where was the media vetting him?
Where was the media vetting the people, the state representative that was elected here in Nashua, who says that he is a female and is out stalking other women and has been in jail or was in jail. He finally resigned his position because he was in jail and wasn't able to take his oath of office. But he was reelected after having served time in prison. So where where is the vetting of the mayor of I think it was Washington D.C. who was in jail at the time they elected him?
Oh, Marion Barry.
Yes, that guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, Congress has, correct me if I'm wrong, they have an exempt thing that if a congressman lies on the floor of Congress, you cannot sue him for defamation of character. There's a stipulation there. And also, if they get involved in a sexual assault fiasco, they've got a slush fund, a special slush fund that covers them.
Yeah.
Why don't all these media pundits wipe that out before they take on poor George Santos? But I think he should finish his 2 years in New York. If they hate him after 2 years, he lies too much or whatever, get him out. But other than that, he deserves to serve.
Well, that is why term limits is a questionable thing. Codifying term limits, in my opinion, is a very, very bad situation, because what it does, we, the people, have the responsibility to elect somebody or to unelect them by electing somebody else to replace them. So if we don't keep, and if we see that they're doing something illegitimate or something like that, we need to be talking to you, talking to other press, talking to our neighbors, and generating the petition or whatever is needed to get them out of office, to impeach them.
Yeah. So, wow, time flies when you're having fun, eh, Karen?
Yes.
I think they just told me, my directors here told me under a minute. So I'll just say, if this has been a blessing to you, and if you want to know more about Karen Testerman, KarenTesterman.com.
Correct.
I think you have Contact Me, a thing available on your website, that if they have any questions for you or you want to elaborate what we talked about, they can talk to you.
Yeah.
And real quick, you don't know yet if you're going to run next year for governor.
That's right.
Yeah, that's good. It's still too early yet. Too early.
Well, it's up to somebody else besides me to make that decision. So we'll
there you
see.
go. So anyway, I hope this has been a joy to you. And catch Karen, www.KarenTestament.com. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We hope to see you again on Frankly Speaking. Bye.